Okay, after virtue, Alistair McIntyre, chapter 16. This chapter is in many ways a recapitulation of the earlier chapters about the need for an objective, universally binding morality and ethics after the loss of the Christian hegemony or the Christian canopy which occupied the world. And then that came to an end with the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment, the various attempts and then failed attempts according to McIntyre to create a basis for a universal binding morality or a basis on something else. And of course, he catalogs a lot of them, and very many of them failed as far as he's concerned. They all failed. He talks about a guy named David Hume, H-U-M-E, Hume. And Hume just, for example, wanted to base his morality on a universal intuition. Again, for him, intuition is that dirty word that pretty much means that you're failing. Or he thought everyone has this preference or passions. And this preference or passion in you is a disposition towards obedience, towards the rules of morality. That is what Hume thinks virtue is. I have a feeling, a preference, and a passion, a taste towards virtue, and that's where I lean towards. That makes me want to follow the rules of morality. But of course, that system falls apart. Why? Well, because obviously, just look around you. We're all too different. We all have various different kinds of preferences and passions. And furthermore, many other cultures have different preferences or passions. Or it could be that your so-called preferences and passions and your rules of morality are merely those things that put you at an advantage. It could be self-serving in a very manipulative kind of way, or it could be that you don't even know unconsciously what you're doing, but what you're doing actually leverages the world towards your particular ends. And all cultures have different preferences and passions. Hume is part of this thing called the Scottish Enlightenment, and there's another guy that he doesn't really talk about, Francis Hutchinson, although he probably talks about him in other chapters. And Francis Hutchinson was actually much more of a Christian, and I might have mentioned this in class to other lectures, but Francis Hutchinson represents a school that's related to Hume, but more Christian, and it's called Scottish moral philosophy. And the idea is that we all have five senses, and the Scottish people say you have a sixth sense. It is a natural moral sense. I smell roses, I am happy. I smell bacon, I'm really happy. I smell rotting flesh, I'm grossed out. I smell vomit, I find that repulsive. I look at a giant pile of horse feces, it's gross, I mean, no one taught me to hate horse feces. No one taught me to run away from vomit or poop. I just know, it wasn't educated. And this is a natural sense in me. And likewise, Francis Hutchinson would say, and he represents the entire school of Scottish common sense philosophy, that we all have common senses. And among these common senses is a sense towards morality and virtue. I like being moral. I'm revolted by virtue. For example, it's not completely a goofy idea. One could say that, I see a mother loving a child. I see one friend hugging another friend, and something in me says, yeah, happy. I see murder. I see exploitation. I see slavery, torture. I see if I witness someone kicking someone's head in to the point of death, I'm revolted, as we all are. No one really taught us these things. We just sort of feel these things, and they're natural. These are common senses. So that could be a basis of morality for Francis Hutchinson. And that's similar to what Hume says. But the problem is it's not universal, right? He's making the claim that we can base morality that applies to all people by looking within ourselves. The problem, as he points out with Hume's virtues, is that they degenerate towards Stoicism, or some form of Stoicism, which is a Roman philosophy. This is what basically Stoicism is in a nutshell. There is a world out there, the natural world, and this world has natural laws, or nature will do what nature does. For example, you know that a hurricane is coming. It's just coming. And there's really nothing you can do with a hurricane. It's going to kill you or kill everyone you love, and it might wipe out your whole village, or maybe it won't. Maybe some will survive. So what do you do in the face of this massive natural hurricane that's coming at you? Well, all you can do is heroically submit to it. Stand up strong, grit your teeth, and put up with it. And in a similar way, though, he would say that's what you do with morality, right? It's there. We can find morality in the natural world. There's a longer tradition of natural theology. We just sort of know what morality is, the same way Newton figured out what the gravity is or what the laws of nature are by looking at the laws, looking at the world. And so Hume might lead you to think, Hume eventually starts thinking it's not just intuition, but just submit yourself, learn from the natural world. That's what morality is. And that leads to a guy named Diderot. Diderot also believed in nature, and nature became a god to Diderot. Nature, according to Diderot, had rules of morality, and you will submit to them in a very stoical kind of way. The problem, of course, is that nature is often cruel. Again, earthquakes, tsunamis, disease, death, and we haven't get to Darwin yet. So then Diderot's problem is, well, how do you deal with the problem of theodicy, or the problem of evil? Because nature's evil sometimes. So can nature really be a source of virtue in a naturalistic, common sort of way? And that fails as well. So again, I mean, what MacIntyre seems to like doing is going through the post-enlightenment moral philosopher and say, fail, 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 fail. So the first part of this chapter is simply another catalog of the failures of non-Christian or post-Christian attempts to come up with a morality that sort of works. And he always says, it doesn't. So what we have now in the world is a world of no common consensus, no culture or history of virtue. There is no community understanding of what virtue is. So, and that's the dilemma that the modern world faces. We have these irreconcilable, inconsolable moral dilemmas. Once again, no common consensus, no common foundation. There is no common history that from which we derive our virtue, and there's no community. Instead, what we have, and he points out various thinkers who illustrate this, is that we all have a certain kind of privatized morality. And virtue then becomes a certain kind of rule following because our virtue has been detached from some larger philosophical truth. Our virtue has been detached from community. Our virtue has been detached from our own personal narrative, and our virtue has been detached from our common history. So instead of virtue, we have privatized morality. We all have our own rules we follow ourselves. And the virtues, he points out, becomes the virtue, plural to singular. The idea of virtues shrinks and contracts. And historically, linguistically, if you just look at it culturally, eventually you get to the point where there's only one virtue as opposed to many virtues. And actually, virtue just becomes synonymous with sexual purity, and vice becomes sexual promiscuity. It gets sad, it gets anemic. Another thing he points out is virtue turns into morality. There are words like virtue, morality, and ethics, and they're kind of mushy. At one point, they had very distinct meanings, but now they kind of, in the common vernacular, when we talk about things, virtue, morality, and ethics kind of becomes the same sort of mushy word that doesn't really mean anything. So what is the difference between virtue and morality? I think this is worth thinking about. Again, this sort of is a recapitulation of what we've already said already in the book and what I've been talking about here, is that a virtue could be defined as a totality of being. Virtue draws from the history of my culture, the narrative of my own life, and the consensus of my own people and culture. And they all culminate in me, and I have all this existing in me. And in me, it is my submission and total absorption into the good. And that good, the good, right, exists before me. It pre-existed me. I didn't create it. It is not contingent. The good is not contingent on my believing in it or my submission to it. It will exist independently of me. If I reject it, it's still there. Again, like gravity, I could deny the belief in gravity. I could say I believe in gravity. Gravity doesn't care. It exists whether I give it consent or not. So that's virtue. Morality as a term, as an idea, is certainly related, but it's far more anemic. Morality, it seems to be a set of rules that one must follow. So Stoicism entails a sort of, like, you might call it a British resolve, a stiff upper lip, clench your fists, grit your teeth, and just do it. You may not like it, you may not understand it, but just do it and submit and yield yourself to it. That seems to be what morality is, a set of just laws that are out there. And it's not really grounded in anything necessarily. It's just something that you have to do and give yourself over to, and you may hate it. And for Hume and others, virtue is what he calls a disposition to do that thing. It is the disposition or the inclination, the feeling to be moral. That's what virtue is for Hume. So there's morality out there, and I just have a disposition, feeling, an inclination to be moral. MacIntyre then goes on to discuss what he calls the last gasp of virtue in the world. And there's some of this I find very interesting. The first one he points out is civic republicanism. And he refers to the Jacobins of the era of the French Revolution. and explains how they actually, in many ways, are the last vestiges, in some way, not partially, not totally, of the Aristotelian classical Christian civic virtues. And I thought that was pretty clear and straightforward. I think you can understand what he's talking about when talking about the Jacobins of the French Revolution as embodying some form of virtue in the post-Enlightenment world. Let me refer to their American counterparts of the American Revolution. And I probably spoke about this already in past classes, but just to remind you, the American revolutionaries, the people that wrote the Constitution, the people that wrote the people like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, that whole revolutionary generation, they were thoroughly enlightened beings, but they were a moderate kind of enlightenment. They weren't radical. And they were still kind of quasi-Christian, or still held on to vestiges of the Christian past. And they read a lot of classical history and a lot of classical philosophy and literature. And so they believed in this idea of civic virtue. They're getting their ideas of virtue from Romans. So, and if we recall, I remember I kind of described the Romans as like Amish with swords. They're communitarian. They are selfless. They give themselves to one another. So briefly, civic virtue or civic republicanism believed in this called civic virtue, which is what they believed in during the American Revolution. So briefly, it's the idea that you live, fight, and die for your fellow citizens. You live, fight, and die for the common good. It's really about fighting, right? It's about us against the enemies who are trying to kill us. That's where civic virtue and civic republicanism is forged. There's a furnace in which it's forged. It's actually quite martial, militant. Again, you live for the common good. I will live, fight, and die for your wife and children. And I do that in part because I know that you will live, fight, and die for my wife and children. We're going to fight the barbarians at the gate, and we're going to fight against them with each other, and we're going to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. The point is, it's not selfish. It can't be selfish. It's got to be for the common good. We are people together in a tribe, in a village. We have grown up together. We have this higher ideal of us together, okay? And we were formed together in the civic virtue idea. And we're not, it's the opposite of being selfish. It's the opposite of the atomized, isolated being living all by him or herself. We live and fight and die together. And part of that is the idea that we're going to live simple and austere lives, not lives of consumption and luxury. We're not going to buy lots of cool things. We're not going to live really luxurious lives with soft pillows and velvet blankets and awesome food. We are simple and rustic and hardworking. We work on the earth. We're all farmers. We actually intentionally deny our appetites. We're going to live like almost like monastic lives on purpose. Maybe we could even afford the finer things in life, but we're going to live like Spartans. Okay, we're going to live tough, militant boot camp kind of lives. Why? Because it's for the common good. In fact, even the stuff I buy and don't indulge in is for the common good, because we need to live together and be. The idea is that hard work is good for the soul. There's also this idea that luxuries will corrupt us, because if I keep feeding my appetites will not be sated. It'll give me a desire for more appetite. So in other words, the more blingy, cool, luxurious stuff I have in my life, it's going to make me want more stuff. And the more stuff I get, I'm going to want more stuff. And as an end result, my soul will be corrupted, and it will make me greedy and self-serving. I'm going to want more stuff for me, and it's going to make me want more stuff. And if I'm going to keep focusing on myself and all the stuff I want, I'm not going to be focused on you and what's good for your soul and your wife and your kids, or the polis, what we are together. So he would find this, and Americans believed in this. Some Jacobins, in the French Revolution believed in this. And he said, this is a vestige. This is some last remaining gasp of this idea of classical virtue. He mentions a British man named Cobbett. And Cobbett is actually a lot like the civic republican virtue people I'm talking about a second ago. Cobbett hates the greed and corruption of capitalism and industrial England. He's seen the world's degenerated, this idea of capitalism. Everyone makes money. I mean, it's a capitalist competition. I make money, and for me to make money, I'm going to defeat you. And for you to make money, you got to defeat me. It's a competition. And the prize is I get more money. But the means by which I get more money is by defeating all of you. Think about the corruptions that we read about in Marx during the Industrial Revolution, and how cruelly you have to treat your workers in order for you to get ahead. There's no sense of civic virtue. There's no sense of the common good. There's no sense of which I sacrifice myself for the greater good. For Cobbett, he's really like Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson thought the best American was the yeoman farmer, meaning you're not really poor, you're not really rich, you're just in that Goldilocks middle spot, where you're not so rich that you don't work at all, because that'll make you a corrupt, a nasty person. If you're so poor you're a slave or you're a peasant, then you're desperate and you're resentful. You have no love for the greater world. The ideal is this virtuous English man who was a farmer, not too rich, not too poor. And the thing is, you got to work hard. You live off the land. And again, it's like that Roman farmer, the Roman civic republican. You have simple, rustic values, enough to keep your belly full, but not enough to be luxuriant, but not so much you're starving. Again, he's like an English vision of Thomas Jefferson. And this builds virtue, right? I mean, working hard on the earth makes you loyal to the people around you and teaches you that you have got to work hard and you have greater goals because of this. You work together. Then the third example of civic virtue, or the last vestiges of virtue in the post-enlightenment world, is Jane Austen. And I gotta say, I'm not buying his interpretation. Other people do, and I think Phil Carey buys it. I'm not getting into that. But anyway, I think she's a great writer, and I love her books. But anyway. But it made me think, though. I mean, I think there's a point here that I would like to jump on. I think marriage and family is like a very good illustration of the virtue that MacIntyre is talking about. My wife and I'm going to describe my marriage and my family, and I'm going to describe it in aspirational terms. We're not actually not this good, but this is what I think what we would like to go for. Okay, my wife and I have a common telos, which is to glorify God and serve God with our entire lives. And I think the idea is in a Christian marriage, we serve God better together than alone. I do serve God alone. I did serve God alone. I could serve God alone. But in marriage, we can actually serve God better together. And all that we do in ourselves, but now as a partner in a joint marriage, is directed towards that telos, which is to glorify God and serve God. And we do that not alone, but now together. And then all the like secondary, tertiary, the ripple effects, all our morality, all our ethics, all our decisions revolve around this common telos, which is to serve God and do it together. And the idea of history and narrative feeds into this idea of our marriage. I didn't just wake up one day at the age of 29 and invent my values ex nihilo, invent my morality ex nihilo by sitting in a room like Descartes and just think really, really hard and derive from reason what my morality is. And then at the age of 30, I married a woman, a wife, who also happened to sit in a room all by herself and through reason, like mathematics, derive at these moral maxims. And then we married each other and we just happened to arrive at the right answers together because we're both smart. No, that's not how it works. I mean, there's reasons for believing in God. There's reasons for being a Christian, or the reason for the morality I have, but that's not how I did it. I mean, I was raised by a family who were Christian, and they infused these values in me, as was my wife, and she was raised in a family that infused values in her. And it wasn't that we had these didactic commandments from my father, so that lectern and lectured at us about what it means to be virtuous, what it means to be a Christian, what our morality is. I mean, I learned to be a Christian. I was shaped and formed into my faith. And I learned by being in a family that was Christian. And I learned to be a father, a husband, a parent of young children by being a child of my parents. There were no lessons. There was no book on how to be a husband and a father. I was raised by a man and by my mother and father. And I just learned by modeling them. And it wasn't even intentional. And even now, the world is different now than it was decades ago. It's not like even if there was a playbook, that playbook that my parents could have written for me if they did, it would be kind of close irrelevant at this point. The world is just so different. I raised my kids in a world that's so different than the ones that they raised me in. And my marriage is different because the context is different than the world that they were raised in. Yet we're still aiming at the same telos. My telos is like my parents' telos. As parents and spouses, my wife and I, we're improvising. I don't want to make it sound like we're just making up crap, though. It's not random. Our attempt at being good parents is based on a continuous dialogue with our virtuous Christian peers. And we read, old classic books and new books by virtuous, thoughtful, smart people. And we're in constant dialogue with the broader community, and we're in constant dialogue with the past. Literally, we talk to our parents about being parents, but beyond that, though, we're coming from several thousand years of virtuous people, and we're in dialogue with the past. And from these new experiences, we are trying to figure out what it means to be good parents in a very different age than the ones that existed for thousands of years. And I think marriage and how you improvise, and yet you're still faithful to the tradition and the community, is an interesting model of what it means to be virtuous. All right.